Hi everyone, today we're looking at competence to exercise the right to remain silent and how people actually understand their Miranda rights during police interrogations. We'll cover the law, who's most at risk, the tools professionals use, and why mental health experts get involved. So, why does this matter? Confessions are a pretty big deal in criminal cases, but a confession isn't really fair if someone didn't truly understand their rights or the consequences of talking. Courts try to balance getting the truth with making sure it's done fairly. Mental health experts can help figure out whether someone really understood what was happening during questioning. So, So, to give up your right to remain silent, you need to do it knowingly, intentionally, and voluntarily. That means you understand your rights, what could happen if you speak, and that you're not being pressured unfairly. Mental health issues alone don't automatically make someone incompetent. Courts care mostly about whether police took advantage of someone's vulnerabilities, like in the case of Colorado versus Connolly. In Colorado versus Connolly, the defendant confessed to police on his own, even though he was later shown to have serious mental illness. The court said the confession could still be used because the police didn't pressure or take advantage of him. Basically, the problem was the illness, not police misconduct. So, to give up your competence depends on both the person and the situation. According to Melton et al., person centered factors include intelligence, suggestibility, and how well someone can understand language and concepts. Situational factors are things like whether the person was tired, stressed, in pain, or under the influence of substances, and also how the officers acted during questioning. Since evaluations usually happen after the fact, experts have to reconstruct the situation carefully, reviewing transcripts, recordings, and police reports to understand how these factors may have affected comprehension and decision making. Competence depends on some groups are especially vulnerable. Kids under 15 often don't fully understand their rights. People with intellectual disabilities can struggle to grasp the meaning of even basic Miranda statements. Individuals with IQs between 71 and 88 may also face challenges. Interestingly, having psychosis alone isn't a strong predictor of misunderstanding, but it can still interact with other issues. Knowing who is most at risk helps mental health professionals and courts focus their assessments where they're most needed. Some groups So, how do mental health professionals actually figure out whether someone understands their Miranda rights? They use standardized assessment tools. One of the most well known sets was developed by Thomas Grisso. These instruments are designed to test things like whether a person can explain the rights in their own words, if they understand key legal vocabulary, and know how those rights function during an interrogation. In 2012, Grisso and his colleagues updated these tools to include clearer language, better instructions, and more representative norms, especially for juveniles. For adult defendants, another commonly used battery is the Standardized Assessment of Miranda Abilities, or the acronym SAMA. This includes quizzes, vocabulary tests, and reasoning tasks to see whether a person truly understands their rights and can apply them to real situations. Together, these tools help experts evaluate whether a waiver of rights was actually knowing and intelligent. So, how do mental Understanding Miranda rights isn't enough on its own. A waiver also has to be voluntary. Voluntariness focuses on whether police used unfair pressure, manipulation, or coercion during the questioning. Mental illness or intellectual disability by itself does not automatically make a confession involuntary. Courts are mainly concerned with whether police took advantage of a person's vulnerabilities. Research shows that false confessions can happen in several ways. Some people confess voluntarily for emotional reasons or even attention. Others give coerced compliant confessions just to escape this stressful interrogation. The most concerning are coerced internalized confessions, where innocent people actually come to believe that they are guilty. Children and individuals with intellectual disabilities are especially vulnerable to these pressures, particularly when questioning is lengthy, repetitive, or misleading. This is why voluntariness remains such a critical part of confession analysis. Understanding Miranda rights is Mental health professionals play a pretty important role in helping courts evaluate confessions. They assess whether a defendant truly understood their rights, whether they were suggestible, and how interrogation conditions may have affected their decisions. These experts may testify during pretrial suppression hearings, sometimes at trial, to help judges and juries understand the psychological factors involved. They also bring in decades of research showing how certain interrogation tactics, such as minimizing the seriousness of charges, presenting false evidence, or implying leniency, can increase the risk of false confessions. By explaining how mental vulnerabilities interact with police questioning, mental health professionals help courts make more informed decisions about whether a confession is admissible and how much weight it should be given. Mental health. So, to sum everything up, competence to exercise the right to remain silent depends on more than just hearing the Miranda warnings. Valid waiver must be knowing, intelligent, and voluntary. Research shows that juveniles and individuals with intellectual disabilities are at a higher risk of misunderstanding their rights or being influenced by police pressures. Courts focus heavily on whether police behavior crosses the line into coercion, especially when vulnerabilities are present. Mental health professionals help bridge the gap between law and psychology by evaluating understanding, suggestibility, and reliability. Ultimately, assessing competence helps protect constitutional rights while still allowing the justice system to function fairly. So, to connect this topic to a real world case, a recent news article discussed a man with mental illness who was interrogated for hours and ultimately gave a false confession. A judge later described the interrogation as psychologically coercive, even though no force was used. This shows how vulnerable suspects can be influenced during questioning. So, my discussion question to all of you is: do you think Miranda warnings actually protect vulnerable suspects, or do they mainly protect police from legal challenges? So, to connect this topic to